supernatural is something that isn't supposed to happen, but it does happen.
And no nation which expects to be the leader of other nations can expect to stay behind in this race for space.
What does it take to convince you that the dead do not always rest in peace?
This episode has been brought to you by Brott's Beard Care, premium beard oil made right here in Central Florida by Kelly Brott himself. Go to brottsbeardcare.com, enter promo code 3beards with a capital B, and you're going to save 20% off your entire order and free shipping. And make sure while you're there, check out our signature 3B blend, which is made specially for us. It is our signature blend. So welcome again, Mark Eddy, secret agent booking man, the man that gets us guests and convinces them that this is, in fact, what they actually want to do, such as what he has done with the man of the hour, Laird Scranton, or as we like to have on our title on our video, Lair. So we're gonna fix that.
What a terrible producer we have! I'm gonna go kick his ass right now.
So Laird,
it wouldn't be real life for me if anybody ever got my name right. This is the story of my life. No problem.
Oh God, what a terrible producer.
Lair is a destination, like the secret room behind his wall of books. But yeah,
I'm
so Laird Scranton.
Just glad it's not Blair, Blaine, Lars, Leonard. Long list of things.
We've talked about that all the time with Mark, and he tells me the horror stories of just he'll do all this effort to get people to come on shows, and then they'll have the host like us that'll be like, okay, who's this guy again? What am I supposed to be doing? Just right at the end, it just not only does it would make us look bad, it makes him look terrible, and it makes you going, why do I even trust this guy to come on a show? Like they don't even know. They think my name's Blair. They think they think my name is Lair. I mean, geez. Well, Laird Scranton, thank you so much for coming on the show. Welcome, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now we're talking about the Dogon, people, and one like your book. I apologize. I was going to have that picture handy, and I didn't. But it was your latest work, The Primal Wisdom of the Ancients.
Right.
Now, yep, and that's one. I got the PDF, and I started reading that, and you were just on with a fan of the show of ours as well, Michael W. Hall, talking about this, and you brought up some really, really fascinating things that I hadn't even really considered before until you talked about, where here's civilization, not just the fact that these civilizations know about technology, about science, about things that they shouldn't, due to the fact that they didn't have a written language. It's all oral tradition handed down through the training. And here's the stuff where they're accurately describing things that they wouldn't have this knowledge of. And the way you tied it in across the globe was, for me, was really fascinating. And that was one of the things I loved about that, and what I've gotten so far out of your book. And so that's what I was hoping to get you to talk about tonight.
Well, thanks. It actually ties in more intimately than even I say in that book. I mean, at the level of Jung's archetypes, you have sort of in the hints that there are similar things going on from culture to culture. But when you get down to the bottom of it, it is much more unified a viewpoint among the cultures than we think. We have themes that carry forward from 9,000 BC to around the year 0, from culture to culture to culture. And when you get to the bottom of it in each culture, you realize they're talking about precisely the same things, sometimes using different words for it. But you get to the bottom of what they mean, and it's precisely the same thing. This is not an incidental system of symbols.
Yeah, and one of the ones where you tied in that I was hoping to get you to kind of expand a little bit on that one too, was the core. Just the correlation is probably not the best word to use for it, but the similarities between Buddhism and the Dogons, how they have how some of these things here, you have two cultures that just geographically and everything based off looking at, there shouldn't be interconnection between these two in any way. There's because there's no written language. So there's, what you're going to have the teacher go thousands of miles on a journey to talk to people that are in the far east. It would be in a monumental journey.
Right. Well, it's actually a simpler perspective than that. Okay. First of all, we're talking about a tradition that begins around 9000 BC, and the outlook of the Buddhists and of the Dogon. The Dogon are a modern-day African tribe from Mali, in northwest Africa. This is a priestly tribe who live in the desert, sort of sequestered from everybody, and their societal imperative is to try to preserve the original forms of these words and these symbols. So, in the perspective of the Dogon and of the Buddhists, this is an instructed tradition that began sometime very anciently, and the deliberate intention was to represent concepts of science and to establish a civilizing plan. And according to the Dogon, the way it was carried out was that a group of 8 initiates or students from each tribal group would be brought to a remote location and instructed there, and then sent back to teach their tribespeople. This is one of those archetype themes that plays out across the world that Jung couldn't understand. It's the tradition of the 8 bringers of civilizing skills, whether they're emperors or mythical ancestors or what they're called in each culture. It's a theme that repeats again and again and again. Some cultures, they deify the bringers of the civilizing skills. But what's being brought is a very coherent civilizing plan that was put together with a lot of forethought. And that's what my book, Primal Wisdom of the Ancients, is about, is discussing all of the different points at which and ways in which anybody who's thinking a little bit can see that this was a very carefully planned, consistent system. The presentation of information was consistent. The way concepts are assigned to symbols is consistent. The way that concepts are represented in myths is consistent. Point after point where the sort of the hand of the instructor is revealed, and this is like the best instructor you could want to have.
Yeah, I'm trying to like pick up some of the images here to show some people, because kind of like what you're talking about, and unfortunately they're all about the, as Zoolander would say, it's like, what is this, art for ants? And I'm getting these pictures that are these little postage stamps that I'm trying to find one as you're talking. But like this one I'm looking at, and people are just going to have to, all right, everybody close your eyes and imagine this. Now, there's the comparison between the astronomical diagram and a Dogon drawing. It's uncanny how a people that do not have any formal like science background are diagramming the atom. They're diagramming these astronomical alignments with almost exact precision. And
right. Now,
go ahead.
This is an apprentice system. So the first thing we have to lose is the modern preconception that an oral tradition is in some way inferior to a written one. Socrates himself, according to Plato, was absolutely against written language. But we know that for centuries, even in our own country and in England, that master skills were passed down from person to person through a system of apprenticeship. That's essentially what this is. You would far rather learn a complicated skill from somebody who'd been doing it masterfully for 30 years than to try to learn about it from articles on the internet. Personal instruction is a by far superior method of transmitting information.
And that's kind of. Do I have an echo again?
Slight.
No. Okay, we'll figure that part out. Shouldn't, but
it's gone now.
Okay, good. It's weird. There's a gremlin that does it every now and then. We have that echo for me. But that was one of the things that really fascinated me about your work and stuff, where you're talking about that because most of us, as we're learning, we have something written down, we can look at, we can reference as we're doing these things. And here is a society where it is told to you, and you take it in. And I'd like to have you explain kind of a little bit about that oral tradition, because I liked how you described it, where it wasn't like, okay, son, sit down here and I'm just going to throw all this stuff out at you. I liked how you described it, where it's like, you ask me the question. If I think it's lack of better, if I think it's a stupid question, this is as far as it goes. If I think you're ready, I'm going to tell it to you. And then I'm waiting for you to show the signs that you're the one I'm supposed to tell the next piece to.
Right. And if I ask a question that's appropriate to what I already know, you're obliged to give me a truthful answer. But if I don't ask the right an appropriate question, then you're obliged to remain silent. Or if I am insistent that I keep pushing, you can lie if you have to get me to stop. But this is absolutely a student-driven method of education. But there's a reason for that, and the reason is that ultimately that replicates the way that information is passed non-materially to the material domain, according to the root philosophy of all this. This all rests on a philosophy in India called Samkhya that was a companion to yoga. The Dogon system rests on it. The Buddha, every major tradition in India rests on it. Most of the concepts you're familiar with derive from it. So it's not that the Buddhists had direct contact with the Dogon about this. It's that they both learned from the same teachers. They learned the same philosophy from the same teachers and learned it in terms of the same symbols and so forth. I'll tell you a quick story. When our kids were young, too young to really remember their names and addresses, we wanted to go to a county fair, and we were afraid, what's going to happen if we get separated from our child? And so it occurred to us to teach them to sing their address and their phone number to the tune of a children's song. In response to the question, where do you live? They would sing our address. Now, we discovered that adults who we would sing that little ditty to 20 years later could remember our address. We had it happen the other week where some shirt-tail relative wanted to send us something and couldn't remember our address, and then thought, oh, wait, I'll just sing the song. And then they had the address.
Awesome.
These are techniques, mnemonic techniques for remembering things that were employed masterfully by somebody back in ancient times.
Wow.
Yeah, and Laird, since you've been talking about these civilizing systems, you also focus on the development of numbers. What's the importance that the role of numbers plays in bringing civilization to people?
Well, on one level, it's one of the, let me back up here. Whoever the teachers were attempting to represent a system that's inherently scientific. I mean, I'm not just talking casually scientific. They're talking about how waves turn into particles and concepts even deeper than that. And so their target audience was one that was thousands of years in the future. It was an audience that had enough technological capability to recognize a drawing of an electron orbital shape when they saw it. This was not, they didn't expect that all of the intervening generations were going to understand what they were passing along. So the difficulty when you're doing that is trying to frame things in terms that are going to be meaningful to a future audience who you don't know for sure who they're going to be and what's going to resonate with them. You're trying to come up with metaphor. A metaphor only works with a person if they get the reference. If I express things in terms of the dialogue of a movie you haven't seen, it's lost. So these teachers were trying their best to hedge that, and the way they hedged it was they would repeat the same information over and over again according to multiple different metaphors. And one of those metaphors was they were trying to convey the concept of a sequence of stages, and the metaphor they used to express that was the act of counting from 1 to 10. If you could grasp the act of counting from 1 to 10, then you could grasp the idea of what I'm talking about when I have stages of creation or stages of matter that play out in a sequence.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one level that numbers have meaning. Another preconception you need to lose is the idea that the ultimate way to express concepts of creation is through math. And I'll try to explain why. From when you get to the bottom of this tradition, what you're really dealing with is an sort of incidental fact that Einstein points to. Einstein says that when mass increases, time slows down. And so if we agree that the ultimate distinction between non-materiality and materiality is the material domain is more massive, we sort of skip past and overlook the fact that implies a difference in how fast time runs. Time runs more slowly in the material domain than it does non-materially. Now, when you try to represent that mathematically from our point of view, you reach a point where the numbers hit zero, and now you're trying to divide by zero, which you can't do, or you go the other direction and you hit a point where it looks like infinity, and math can't deal with concepts of infinity, and so math breaks down. Math's not the way to go. When you're taking a qualitative approach to it, which is what Einstein did with all of his theories, his theories were only confirmed by math later on. He developed his theories qualitatively by thinking about what the relationships of certain things were and how those had to play out. Well, if you look at things qualitatively, to say that at the quantum level, at the level of quantum entanglement, time runs 10,000 times more quickly than it does for us, you don't hit a divide by zero problem. Even if you carry it back to the Big Bang and say time runs 1,000,000 times more quickly at the point of the Big Bang than it does for us, you still don't hit a divide by zero problem. So we want to conceptualize these things in a different way. Math is a good way of representing certain things, but it's not a good way to get at the answers about things. And we're all educated to think that math is the be-all and end-all of everything. They can't make string theory work.
I know that's the thing. It's one of those. It's an awesome concept, but you can't make it work.
And that may be deliberate. That may be deliberate. That came out of an era when I see evidence that in various fields of study, obstacles were deliberately thrown up to put people off the track of where the real answers are.
Now, let you touch on that one where, and I'm trying to remember if I could get just the part right, where you talked about the multiple, like from different universes, that the knowledge is, I think that's you said is coming between the two, like they were getting information from another area, and it's basically just like a cycle.
Yes, Samkhya says that universes form in pairs, one non-material and one material. Now, the non-material universe is said to have perfect knowledge. I understand that's because time runs infinitely quickly there, and so all events essentially happen at once, and so they have a complete overview of time. The problem is that time runs so quickly that they have no moment in which to take an action. And so Samkhya says non-materiality has perfect knowledge, but an inability to act. The material domain has imperfect knowledge with full ability to act. And so Samkhya says there are routine attempts made to communicate knowledge from the non-material side to the material side, or to induce action on the material side. And those come in several specific forms. They come in the form of meaningful synchronicities, coincidences, vivid dreams, the unusual behavior of animals, divination and clairvoyance, and many of the things that we consider to be paranormal. These are all potentially modes of communication. The shaman who uses hallucinogenic drugs to put himself in a state where he's more receptive to it, that's a way of going about it. Kabbalism defines more than a half dozen different classes of what they call mystics based on how they are able to attune themselves to information.
So like Joe Rogan, where he's like he touts the DMT.
Right.
He's like a huge believer in DMT, where it takes you to that state where it's like you're able to go to another conscious level that you would not have been able to achieve, just sitting here.
Right, but that works for one person and maybe not for another. Your typical psychic healer receives information in very much the same way I say the Dogon initiate receives it. The typical psychic healer will pose a question And if the question's appropriate, they get an answer. Sometimes the answer they get back is, I'm sorry, that's above your pay grade. I've had circumstances where that work both ways, where one of these people will pose a question that I'm interested in learning the answer to, and they're told, I'm sorry, that's above your pay grade. And then I'll say, can you ask the question on behalf of me? And when they ask it, then they get an answer back, and the answer fits nicely with the body of information I already have. Or the other way around, where I'll ask them to ask on behalf of me, and they get no answer, but they ask on behalf of themselves, and they get the answer.
And one of the ones I talked to Mark a little bit about this one too. I was going to post this. I've been trying to, as we've been talking about, trying to figure how to frame this one too. Have you come to any kind of, like a theory, a conclusion on who might be the source of this knowledge that somebody like the Dogon, that the early Buddhists, were able to draw from? Because one of the reasons I'm kind of when you go across the world in all different cultures, they have the picture, the depictions of some sort of feathered being that's holding that bag.
Right.
They all have these certain things that it's almost a standard across the globe. Every culture seems to have this common theme. So there's obviously something in our collective past that was there. I mean, whether we could all debate about where they came from, another planet, another dimension. We can have all that thing, but there is definitely South America, Asia, India. They all depict that same being.
Well, yes and no. The Dogon system demonstrates that, and Samkhya too, that at bottom, this system is about science. This is about simple dynamics of energy that underlie everything. And if you understand that handful of dynamics, they play out in parallel on all scales upward. This is not rocket science. This is very simple dynamics of energy. There are two aspects to, if we think that there's a public Buddhism called exoteric Buddhism and a private Buddhism called esoteric Buddhism. Well, the public Buddhism says what all of your major religions say, which is those processes of creation are fundamentally unknowable. But when you reach the level of esoteric Buddhism, they sort of sheepishly admit, well, that's one of the little fibs we make. In fact, this is entirely knowable. This is one of the problems I personally came across was as I was conducting my research and writing these books, it was increasingly looking to me as if this is not mysterious stuff. This is very straightforward stuff. Not only that, they're flatly telling us, if you know how to understand the terms they're using, they're flatly telling us what everything represents. The ancient names flatly tell you what it represents. You don't have to guess. So any representation that doesn't fall into the domain of recognizable science isn't ultimately the bottom level of this thing. We're seeing sort of symbolic representations that it's hard to distinguish. Is this symbolic or is this literal? All of the literal stuff falls in the domain of science, and we can demonstrate that it's reasonable science. So we get to the level of feathers and of handbags and things like that. We're already in a symbolic domain. We're not in a literal domain. Now, that's not to say that non-materiality doesn't express itself in certain ways to certain people. Similar to the concept of how we dream, there are certain common themes about how dreams express themselves, common images, common symbolic references, and so forth. So there's a degree of reality to that, but that's not ultimately what they're talking about. That's all projection. When we get down to what they're really talking about, it's always science, and it goes way, way deep. The next book that I plan to work on gets down to the level of root energies and how it is that non-materiality and materiality differentiate from each other in the first place. And it's fairly straightforward stuff. It's just a matter of looking at it the right
way. Oh, okay. Since we were just talking about including feathered creatures, okay. that may be part of how the information was disseminated around the world. But in your primal wisdom of the ancients, Laird, you have a chapter on the importance of water. It's entitled Nature of Water. Yeah, there's a, a lot that ancient cultures were learning about water that became the foundation of scientific principles. Like you were talking about the oscillation of water with the wind. Throw a rock in it, and the ripples keep going out.
Right. Water makes an excellent metaphor for energy. Scientists use it all the time when they want to understand what the dynamics of energy are. They can illustrate it for themselves by watching the dynamics of energy. The dynamics of a whirlpool are the same as the dynamics of a black hole.
Sorry,
don't cut off your question.
No,
but it goes. It's larger than that. That one of the sort of the evolutions of thought that I've had to go through is understanding that things that I had always taken as being symbolic references are actually literal ones, or understanding on what a broad scale things are symbolic. I never understood that a Torah scroll is symbolic. I never understood that the relationship between an initiate and their informant is symbolic. It's symbolic of a dynamic that we need to understand. And pretty much every last thing in this tradition, on one level or another, boils down to symbolically representing something. Whoever put the system together was OCD crazy about consistency representing this stuff. And once you realize that helps you figure things out. It's like with an infant. If the more consistent a parent can be about what they do with a very small infant, the easier it is for the infant to figure out what's going on. Is this bedtime or is this sleep for the nighttime? Have a different process for each time, and they figure it out.
Now, is there any connection with this knowledge, like for the Dogon and stuff, to the recent discovery, Göbekli Tepe, just where you have this is going way back to where this is going to be along that same thing. There's the structures. There's not a whole lot of, actual writing. It's mostly the same thing. It's the drawings. It's the different representations and stuff. Do you see any connection between this recent discovery site and this Dogon tribe that you focused on?
Absolutely. That's the point where this tradition starts. If you think about the Egyptians talking about a first time, or the Buddhists talking about the first time that knowledge was passed to humanity by a Buddha, there are numbers of different ways in which they're specifically describing that Göbekli Tepe region. And the only reason the Egyptians have to call it the first time is because there was more than one time. If there had only been one time, they could just say, "Oh, remember that time." But in fact, we have several different eras in which this instruction is being presented. One of those is around 9000 BC at Göbekli Tepe in southeast Turkey. Another one is at around 3200 BC in northern Scotland. It looks like we have instruction happening in other localities around the world also at various periods of time. Looks like that might have gone on at Elephantine in Egypt around 4000 BC. It looks like it might have gone on Malta at around 4000 BC. And who knows where else in the world it might have happened. But when the Dogon are talking about their instruction, it looks to me as if most of their reference are aimed at the 3200 BC Orkney Island era. What their descriptions are aligning with that era. However, the Dogon also preserve specific societal elements that absolutely tie to Göbekli Tepe. There's an altar stone I picture in the book I released last week, that a Dogon altar stone that is covered with relief carvings that look of animals that look indistinguishable from the Göbekli Tepe carvings.
Wow.
That's pretty cool. I'm trying to bring up that image right now so that way people can see. But go ahead, Mark.
Oh, I was just gonna say, since Laird just mentioned the Orkneys, in his Scarab Bray book, you do cover some of the similarities and the design of homes in Africa and the Orkney Islands. That's thousands of miles apart. Some of the similarities in language. Like, for example, there's the Old English word NASA, like nose. I'm probably mispronouncing that. And in Egyptian, a nes is a tongue. There's you draw our attention to architectural styles as well as language similarities. You have the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt and the Faroe Islands.
Right. I mean, that always struck me as too precious a comparison. My whole life, I would hear the word Faroe Islands, and my immediate response was, wow, it's really, as I said, too precious to think that the word Faroe and Faroe Islands in any way connects the word Pharaoh in Egypt. But there are connections.
And exactly, the connections from so far apart, going north to south, and you've also spoken about Buddhist or Tibetan cultures to the east. Ideas are going out all around the world during these ancient times, and there's a similarity.
Right.
Your concept is very captivating.
Well, on Orkney, there were, first of all, the Scarab Bray era on Orkney around 3200 BC actually precedes dynastic Egypt by a few hundred years. So what was going on there preceded ancient Egypt. In fact, there are more than half a dozen elements at Abydos in First Dynasty Egypt that look for all the world like nostalgia for Orkney. They're going out of their way to deliberately recreate factors that existed on Orkney 200 years earlier, or maybe even contemporaneously with it. Now, another circumstance is, the same is true in culture after culture. You have it happen at Stonehenge in the UK. The first placement of stones at Stonehenge in the UK was a match for a structure called the Ring of Brodgar on Orkney. It's same dimension, same number of stones set out the same way with the same kind of trenching, contemporaneous era. Also nearby there, someone built a stone house that's an exact replica down to the dimensions and the placement of stone furnishings of a late era house at Scarab Bray on Orkney. There are shards of pottery at Stonehenge that represent the two kinds of pottery found on Orkney. There are inscribed stones there that match inscribed stones found on Orkney. So it looks like at 2600 BC, just about the time work started commencing at Stonehenge, somebody with a heck of a lot of stoneworking knowledge from the Orkney region was brought in or came in and was responsible for engineering the Stonehenge placement. Now on Orkney, we have two ancient languages. One is called Norn. It's based on Norwegian, has basically Norwegian roots, and there's practically no overlap at all between Norn language and the Dogon language, nothing recognizable. But there's a second language called Faroese, and the Faroese language is a treasure trove of words. any time in any of the other cultures that I research, when I find a word where the researchers there say, well, we don't really have a coherent etymology for this word, but we think it means this. You go to the Faroese language and you discover what it really means. It happens in Hinduism with titles of Ganesha, the elephant god. It happens in Crete time and time again with words that were expressed later in ancient Greece, but that they have no etymology for. They know it comes out of ancient Crete, but they don't know where it came from before that time. They guess, well, there might be a connection to an Egyptian word. Turns out the Egyptian word ties back to the Faroese word. So Faroese is one of the, and sometimes on Orkney, you discover words that are clearly ancient Greek. There's a word Haades on in the Faroese language, refers to the floor or the lowest part of something. That's the word Hades in Greece. And I can say that with confidence because there are so many other words that align in the same way or in similar ways. The Faroese language is a huge resource for understanding these things. The trick is getting down to commentators who prioritize the idea of telling you what the original word forms were. If you can get back to those original word forms, there are no secrets. They're flatly telling you what everything means.
That's great. I'm like, so I'm like, my mind, I'm still trying to wrap up everything here too. It's the same thing, because my previous question about like the teachers, where do you think the reasoning is between, to where because there's no commonality between those two languages, right? Why was, especially if it's like a common teacher, like if I'm going to teach around the thing, why was it this, almost like broken up in two? I mean, why isn't there a similar, any crossover between the two? Because you'd think that there would be some similarity between the teachings.
Well, first off, it's unreasonable to think that the teachers managed to hit every region in the world. To begin with, if we're talking about a teacher who's instructing people in concepts that relate accurately to quantum physics, then transportation around the world around the planet is not an issue for them. That's not their biggest problem. Clearly, anybody who knows about quantum physics is able to get around. So the distances no longer matter. We're not talking about hunter-gatherers on camels. We're talking about somebody who knows about astrophysics. But any of the cultures who preserve what I call signatures of this tradition. I'll give you an example of what a signature of the tradition is. Any culture that measured things in cubits. Any culture that imagines that there's a spiral or a wheel associated with Orion. Any culture that talks about water, fire, wind, and earth. There are any number of these, what I call signatures, that simply by the fact that they are placing emphasis on that element, I know without looking that they were influenced by this tradition. And now I know that it's worth my time to explore how much of that did they manage to preserve and how much didn't they. And certain cultures preserved a lot and for certain cultures didn't. Because it's a complicated symbolic system, in ancient times, the tribal groups seem to have specialized. The way that as a college student you will declare a major subject that is your focus. The tribes seem to do this, and they name themselves according to their specialty. There's a group in Tibet on the border, from the borderland between Tibet and China, called the Naki or the Naxi. The classic version of this naming convention rests on an Egyptian word. It's actually a cosmological word. Sakai, S-K-H-A-I. In Dogon language, it's now expressed as Sigi, S-I-G-I or S-I-G-U-I. For the Naki or the Naxi, it was the Xi or the Ki part of the word that represents Sakai. On Orkney, there's a bay of scale, and the Sakai is the first piece of that. Sakai means to celebrate or to celebrate a festival. Naki or Naxi means celebrates Na. Na is the concept of the feminine non-material. On Orkney, the term Skael says celebrates El. El was a god of space, but he was a Canaanite god from clear across the world from where Orkney is. Wow. In Egypt, the term was Mer-Ra, means loves Ra. In Judaism, it was Yahudah, means praises Yah. these naming conventions are a tip-off. You find an ancient tribe that expresses their name that way, and you absolutely know they were influenced by the tradition.
I'm just blown away how you had that just off the top of your head. I was just, I'm like, I would have had to have a list or something like that. I mean, you just rattled that off like this is something that, just you go to sleep reciting, because you got to say it the next day.
No, I mean,
that's
I've been working with it long enough that it's in there.
But Craig and Austin, when Dennis Stone was a guest back in July when we started working together, I think he brought up they've been working on the megalithic yard is starting to be seen as a pattern at his place. And with all this math and that Laird's brought up, we know the megalithic yard was used at Stonehenge. It's the same dimensions were found in Central America as well.
Right.
These number like the same pattern, just like with the root words, this same standard unit of measurement is being found around the globe about the same time.
Right.
How are they getting there? How's that? Diffusion of ideas, or how are they getting that idea across the water?
This is deliberate instruction in a location. Primarily Göbekli Tepe at 9000 BC, primarily Orkney Island at 3200 BC, and the students were brought there and then returned back to where they came from.
Well, that would kind of answer my question. I was just, when you said that, I was just thinking, well, there's the reason why, especially if you had a centralized area, here's the teacher, and then everybody spreads out from there. That would be how you could have one location has a completely different word system than the other one, because now you're teaching to an area that is completely different. I could see.
Right, and in these cases, you have two languages that are interfacing with each other. You have all the cosmological words that are being taught to the initiates, and they go back to their native country where people are speaking a different language. So you may find a smattering of cosmological words that line up and a whole bunch of other words that don't. For example, one of the common themes here that passes from region to region to region is the concept of a crown. The word for crown in southern Turkey was tepe. The word for crown on Orkney, there were two words. One was skali, which is like sakai, from the word sakai that I was talking about, or like the word scale, which is the name of the bay that the Skara village overlooks. But there's a second term, krona, which is actually the word for crown in the Aegean. This comes out of Crete and places like that. So you end up having this these same concepts expressed sometimes by multiple words. In ancient Greece, there's Critias, I think, is the person who explains that the Greek habit, their preference was to translate terms into their own language. And so being aware of that, not to look necessarily for the original cosmological term because it's been translated into a different language before they expressed it. In other cultures, there's no effort to translate the word. It's just a direct carryover of the cosmological term. Now, the Dogon have done us a very great favor because the Dogon preserve original phonetics of the cosmology. The way the Dogon language works, the root Dogon language works, you've got each syllable acts as a symbol. Each syllable relates to what I call a root concept. And then larger words are built by mixing and matching those syllables. Combine the concepts you want to put together to get the bigger concept. And so I can predict just by hearing a Dogon word what it means. Same thing for the Maori language in New Zealand. They work from the same basic phonetics. I can usually predict from a Maori word in New Zealand what their cosmological term means based on how it's pronounced. So part of it is getting to that level, recognizing when people are using versions of these same phonetics, what it means. And there's certain natural linguistic translations of things that happen, and some of it might not be natural. In Hebrew, you had 8 or more letters that carried 2 pronunciations, that a P could be an F, for example, under different circumstances. And so you have certain words, like you have a word feel that represents the concept of an elephant in one culture. You go to the next culture and it's peel, P-I-L. It's the same word, but you have to understand that certain of these phonetic values flip. Some cultures don't have an L sound, so it becomes a Y. Some cultures don't have an R sound. And so you sort of have to tune your ear to this is an approximate sound, not a precise sound. But that goes along with the whole concept of the science we're looking at. One of the huge clues this tradition gives us, using the cubit as a unit of measure, is that we shouldn't be looking at precise units of measure. The cubit is defined either as the distance from the elbow to the tip of the little finger, or as the average pace or step of a person. Now, every person measures that a little differently. Mm-hmm. The concern wasn't precise measure the way that we're taught to consider things, that if you can get it to 5 decimal points, it's better than if you can't. That's not true in this tradition. In this tradition, what we're concerned about is relationships between things. In the Buddhist system, it's relationship between geometric shapes that recreate how space forms and that illustrate how time works. But it's the relationships, not the specific size, that matters. But there's a reason for that also. It's because we're not aware, just as back in the day, it looked to us like the sun was orbiting the Earth. And it took a real flip of insight on somebody's part to realize there was another possibility here, that maybe the sun wasn't going around the Earth. Maybe there was a more complicated dynamic going on, that actually the Earth was circling the sun. The same thing is true for modern science. The piece they're missing is that time is not a constant. The rate of time is not constant. There's an Egyptian concept of mat, which is the concept of truth. And the root word ma reads, the symbols of the word read, perception is the foundation of measure. If you can change how quickly time runs, you can change the way we perceive everything. Because imagine, we know that light, the speed of light is a constant, which means every second, no matter how fast we're moving, we measure time as moving up the same distance, the same speed. If you could change the rate of time so that a second took twice as long today as it took yesterday, light would travel twice as far today as it did yesterday, and so it would look to us like a universe was expanding. We would have no way of distinguishing that it wasn't. But under the covers, the truth is, that's not what's going on. What's going on is time is slowing down. That's why when the astronomers use their telescopes, look out at the universe, and are confused because it looks like the rate of expansion of the universe is speeding up. No. What they're seeing is the consequence of their own time frame slowing down. It's like being on a train and having the train next to you change its speed. It's not immediately obvious. Did your train speed up, or did the other train slow down, or what?
This is happening. I was going to say, this is, for me, this is when I took astronomy back in college. This is the part, I'm trying to remember the Matthew McConaughey movie, where this was always the time thing that always threw, when they were on the planet and they're like, okay, guys, every minute we're here is, and you're like, how does this work? Because it's the same thing. Just us just sitting here for a half hour, our family members are dead.
Right.
That wasn't Stellar, was it?
It might have been
that was Interstellar. That was Interstellar, but that's not really an accurate scientific view of how it works. But it's the right concept.
it is that type of thing. Is when you have these discussions with people, they're like, wait, what? And I'm like, this is the one time, and it's because when you were with Michael Hall, I really was fascinated by that. How they used to observe a 10-day week.
Right.
And
Just this last week, there was an astronomical announcement made that they had witnessed a supernova that released intensely more energy than they've ever seen released before in like a fraction of a second. They don't think it should be possible. It happened billions of years ago. Well, billions of years ago, because the universe wasn't as massive as it is now, time was running infinitely more quickly than it is right now. So what they're measuring as being a split second, in the reality of when that explosion happened, was actually a normal explosion. They aren't accounting for the fact there's a difference in time frame here.
Could we apply the same concepts to Methuselah, and that's why he's 900 years old?
Yeah, we might be able to apply it to that. We might also be able to apply it to explain how is it that a Brontosaurus didn't collapse under his own weight. If things were less massive back then gravity was less back then, and his bones could support his body.
Wow.
It's possible there were giant humans because with less gravity, they might have grown bigger.
Because that would definitely explain, especially some of the rumors, the 30 to 40 foot tall, humans that were found.
It would also explain what we see with the continents, because the continents fit together as if the Earth used to be a smaller ball. Mm-hmm. And you can explain where the continents are now just by imagining that the Earth expanded over time. And you can tell how far it expanded by how far apart the continents are.
Wow.
I'm just mine is expand it. So I mean, in a distant thing, I mean, we could possibly see like some of these planets even more of a massive size.
We could. I mean, it only goes back so far. And one of the things I wish, one of the really cool things about the process I've been through is that every time that I sort of catch myself thinking, gee, if it had been me putting the system together, I would have been sure to find a way to represent such and such, because it would really help me as a researcher on this end if someone had just quantified this thing for me. And then I go to look for it and I discover, guess what? They did it. Well, one of the things I had wished that someone had quantified for me was, what are the relative time frames of the different domains? Us compared to the quantum world, compared to the Big Bang era and eras in between. If only someone had quantified that so we had a sense of how much time was speeding up and slowing down. In fact, they did it. The Egyptian hieroglyphic language, the glyphs they use sensibly represent what those eras are, the shapes that are represented, and the values assigned to them are just sort of don't make sense from a mathematical or a accounting standpoint for ancient Egypt, but they make eminent sense in terms of if we're talking about relationships between matter as we observe it and matter in the quantum domain. They've done tests. They've compared how long it takes a particular interactions to happen between electrons when they're entangled and when they're not entangled. And they discovered it's a 10,000 time ratio. It's 10,000 times quicker at the quantum domain. Guess what? That's what the Egyptian numbers already told me. I already understood that the quantum domain time runs 10,000 times more quickly than it does for us. And that's why it looks entangled to us.
That's the crazy part. That's always blown my mind, is just because here we are, we're in this period in time and we're discovering these things here. And here you have a civilization thousands of years ago chiseling it on a wall.
Yeah.
Right. Because they knew it was important.
Yeah. And when you're thinking, it's like, so the biggest mystery, for me, is one of those, if I could place myself in one thing, I would want to know, why was this knowledge just chopped off? I mean, what was the reason that we went from having this amount of knowledge to suddenly we had that drop off period where it was just gone?
Right.
The dark ages, to say, I mean, some people said, the church, came in, the moment, religion became the focus, that was the time that learning, took a dive. But that would be my thing, is figuring out how you could go from something like the Mayan, the Incan cultures, You have all these, the Göbekli Tepe, you have all these people that had this knowledge, had this thing that we're just now discovering through electron microscopes and seeing the atoms for ourselves. They're drawing a picture of it thousands of years ago.
Right. And I could see that the Dogon understood atoms and electrons and protons and neutrons. At the very beginning, I could see that. And that's what gave me confidence that I should look into whether everything else they were describing could be scientifically accurate also. I wanted to demonstrate for myself whether it was or it wasn't. And what I kept finding was the farther you go down, the more it makes sense. If you look at these things the way the Dogon priest looks at it, all sorts of intractable issues of science just sort of evaporate, because it's like the math versus qualitative look at things. The whole issue divided by zero evaporates. It's the same way with all these questions. The questions of how does a wave turn into a particle, all of the mysteries of that evaporate. It's a single set. It's a handful of dynamics of energy that are pretty easy to understand, that once you have your arms around those, if they play out in parallel form all the way up the scale, you understand it at any level that you can perceive, and you can predict what it's going to be like at the other levels.
Wow. Yeah, no, you have given me a lot of research. I have to This is one of those things. My library expands all the time, and just I look at, but this is wow.
That's a lot to soak in.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So you can imagine that I have frequent wow moments. This latest book that I just finished writing, and it's self-published. When you're in the sort of down in the trench writing the book, it's hard to get an objective view of what's in it or how it ties together. But once I got my hands on the printed proof, then suddenly that sort of objectifies it. And going back through and reading it, I accidentally wowed myself at a number of different points in the book about the way that things come together that I hadn't sort of sat back and taken an overview of. But it's really interesting stuff.
And Laird, your works aren't based on just being holed up in your office with your books, and you have gone out to do extensive travels. You've been to a lot of these places.
No, not really. Mostly, okay, you have a group like French anthropologists who spent 30 years with the Dogon and recording all this material for 30 years in the hopes that someone's going to leverage that material. My job has been to leverage that material. And so there really only have been a few places that I've traveled to and actually seen, with my own eyes.
You went to the Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands.
Right. I went to Skara Brae in the Orkney Islands. I've been to Peru. I've been to the Faroe Islands. I've been there's a reasonable chance I'll end up getting to go to Göbekli Tepe once things open back up. But wow. I always said that I would go to a place when I had a good reason to. There's no point in going to the Dogon country because I know a Dogon priest won't talk to me until they know me for 10 years.
That adds to a lot of time and research for a book. When you're like, why did it take you so long? Well, I had to spend a decade just to get them to trust me.
Yes. Well, I'm now at the point where you're getting the multiplying effect of all those years of accumulating stuff you didn't know what to do with. And suddenly, the one right piece falls into place, and a whole book's worth of information falls out.
Wow.
How long does it take you to write one of these? Your books, with the researching of the language, is it a lengthy process, or?
Well, the first books were like 3.5, 4 years. The book Mystery of Skara Brae happened mostly in 3 months. The book before that, Point of Origin, happened in about 6 months. The last 3 years, because it takes. If you're traditionally publishing a book, it can take 1.5 years from the time you submit the manuscript to the time it's published. Well, that's too slow a time frame for me. I can produce a second book and self-publish it in the same time. So the last 3 years, that's what I've done. I've traditionally published one book and self-published a second book.
Okay. Will you be making any upcoming appearances on Ancient Aliens?
I don't have anything scheduled that way. Mostly what I'm doing right now are podcasts connected with promoting Primal Wisdom of the Ancients, which is my recent book from Inner Traditions, and then whatever turns up as a result of the book I just self-published.
Nice. And somehow we got lucky and got you on here during this schedule.
Yeah.
I got lucky.
Once again, due to the connections of Mark. Yeah. Yeah, it's been really, like, for me, it's just coming onto this journey. It's like we started out with just the podcast. I mean, we've talked about it a few times where it's just, we did not see ourselves in this position at all, when we started this. I mean, this is starting about June, end of June, July is when we kind of met up with Mark, and it's taken a whole nother turn. And I've loved it because, like I said, having the opportunity to talk with yourself, this never would have happened had we not done this, because that's the thing, and which is fantastic. And that's why I said, reading these books, you've given a whole nother aspect, because I've always had these questions in the back of my head. It just, when I'm reading these stuff, is because ever since I've been a little guy, I always had that why. I was never satisfied with somebody just telling me it's here. And I'm like, well, I want to know why. I mean, why did, Göbekli Tepe, why did they build this?
Right.
I mean, they didn't just one day wake up and just say, hey, I want to arrange a bunch of rocks, and then walk away and just like, ooh, well, hopefully in 10,000 years I can figure this crazy thing out, and just walk away.
Well, there is an understandable and sensible motive for why this all happened. Unfortunately, to present the foundation in a way that's credible to somebody is about a book length process. So I wrote a book to do that. It's called Seeking the Primordial, and it sort of puts into context, comparing multiple traditions, what that rationale is. What is that underlying motive that would cause a non-material entity to take action materially and try to establish a framework for society, for humanity?
Well, yeah, definitely, we got to get people to, check you out there in Inner Traditions and, get those books.
If we have a nice companion guest, coming up with Maria Wheatley. They know each other. She's one of the best.
I love her.
Laird and Maria are just a great combination.
I can't speak highly enough about Maria. Maria has a foot in science and a foot in the esoteric, and she knows her stuff, and she's well-intentioned and well-spoken and knows her subject matter, and is just the person to go to if you're talking about stones and energy in the UK in particular. Not just the UK, but that's her specialty. Yeah.
Oh, we're looking forward to. We have her scheduled sometime soon, but I think she's going. We'll have great information to build on what foundations you laid for tonight's show. She can take it in other directions, and if the listeners and viewers really enjoy your information, she's going to like the different directions that she can take them from about the same time periods with 3200 BC time.
Avebury, where she's located, was the heyday of that was the tail end of the era of Skara and Orkney. It's the same era of Stonehenge I was talking about, where suddenly placements were being made in the UK.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So
wow.
It's really nice how Laird and Maria work so well together. With these, they come up with independently derive conclusions. And so it's fascinating listening to both of them. So Laird, tonight was just another fantastic show.
Well,
Great
thanks.
ideas.
I appreciate you inviting me on.
Oh yeah,
and what you cover with the astronomical achievements of the Dogon and the how did they know that hundreds of years before like the telescope was invented, little stars or satellites in front of Sirius. How'd they know that? And then where did their teacher come from? The Nomo.
Right.
What's the story that? And
it's unfortunate. It's a long story. It's a non-material to material transformation, according to the Dogon, and there is a scientific perspective to explain how that might happen. They're describing non-material entities that chose to take material form and interact with humanity in a real world setting.
And that's our Reading Rainbow moment. If you want to know more, you go to innertraditions.com, go to author Laird Scranton.
That's right. It's more of a choose your own adventure story.
That's right. Yeah, it was like long story. It's like, oh yeah, we can't get into one of those. I was like, yeah, this is like, do you want to? I really love this book, and you should buy this book and go to innertraditions.com and find Laird Scranton. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, no, it's Laird. I really want to appreciate, just thank you, and we appreciate you taking the time out of your night to come on, talk with us too, because this is one, everybody, if you found this information on the Dogon and this thing interesting, please go support him at innertraditions.com. Look him up there, Laird Scranton. He's got his whole list of books, and you, especially like those ones where you've got it down there. I mean, you've started from, kind of like you said, you've got the bedrock down there, and then you've just kind of layered on it. And if you can follow these things along, you're gonna have this list of work where you've got some reading ahead of you, and you're gonna come away, with some pretty cool information. I mean, like I said, my mind, one, I don't know if you saw it, just one as you were talking, I was just like I go, mind is blown. I'm like, wow. I go, man, I got a little bit behind me. So, but I just, once again, just thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate you getting us in touch with Laird. This was fantastic. And
Laird was a star of the show tonight. Amazing information.
I just noticed on the pictures.
Happy to come back. Go ahead.
Yeah, I just noticed on the video there that we've named each one of you guys Orange Spice, apparently. If you look underneath each picture, it says Orange Spice.
That's good.
Yes.
Oh, I'm just one of those things. Just like my mind, just like.
I was going for Scary Spice. I'm sorry.
There you go. That's awesome.
That's awesome.
All right, gentlemen. Well, hey, have a fantastic evening. Thanks again, and we'll definitely said we're going to have to bring you on for part 2, and one of these aspects, because
sure,
as Mark was laying, saying it there, this thing is just starting to form like a web. Just as we get these things, we're running into, we get another one, and all of a sudden, oh my God, that's exactly what Laird was talking about when we just had him on. That's what has been fantastic about these interviews we've had. So have a great night, and we will be in touch, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. And this episode has been brought to you by Bratz Beard Care, premium beard oil made right here in Florida and Winter Garden, made by Kelly Brat himself. BratzBeardCare.com. Use promo code 3beard with a capital B. You're going to save 20% off. Check out our signature blend. You purchase a bottle of that, you are helping not only us, but you're also helping Kelly, and that's what keeps us on this air, allowing us to talk to Mark, and so you are doing us all a favor. So we appreciate that. Go to Nanny Cakes 407 on Facebook, or give her a call at 407-923-2898. In the Central Florida area, mention Three Beards. You're going to save 15% off that order, which for anybody that's priced out cakes or wedding cakes, that's an amazing discount. So check her out on there. Give her a call. Visit us at threebeardspodcast.com. Let us know where our website has failed us and where it needs to be improvement. We would love that. Go to patreon.com/threebeardspodcast. Become one with the Beardos. Show us some love. We'll appreciate it. Social media, you've already found us here on Facebook and YouTube, but if you could make sure you subscribe and share that with people. We would absolutely love it. And that's, once again, Mark, can't thank you enough. You've been amazing help for everything. And just tonight, I said thanks for this and the previous show. We had a lot of fun.
Thanks for making it happen. It's great working with you, Chris, and Austin, and Laird. It was what about the first guy with no facial hair that I've been on. It's like I should appear more with like Catherine and Varla, just save me for the women researchers, because it's like,
well, we keep joking that we need to get the thing with the beard, so where we can, you can hold up there with us on the stick, so that way you have the beard. I mean, we keep talking about it, but we never get around to doing it. And I don't understand.
I tried the beard last week. It kind of looked like stand in for Chris. It didn't work out too well. So.
Yeah, you have to get beyond that itchy period, and then like I said, when you start using beard oil, it really helps out, because then it doesn't get that hole where you're just sitting here, you're doing the whole.
Yeah, like a dog.
So, all right, everybody, thanks again for watching. Appreciate it, Mark. Thank you, everybody. Have a great night. We will see you next Wednesday when the aforementioned Varla Ventura will be visiting with us, and we will be talking all things mermaid. So everybody, have a great evening. We will see you next week. Good night.